Hello.
Hello.
Here.
Where?
Oh!
Sorry, Alf.
You look under the hood. I'll take care of this. Goodbye.
Most service stations aren't just service stations, but a Standard Oil station is something else.
July 2nd, 1971. For the last 3 hours, Jim Morrison and his friend, Alain Ronay, have been strolling throughout the streets of Paris. Throughout their walk, Ronay has noticed that his friend appears shaky and unwell. Several times, Morrison breaks out into violent spasms in a bad case of the hiccups. The rock star, however, insists he's okay. But in less than 15 hours, he will be far from okay. Around 2 p.m., they reach Place de Vogue, the city's famous Renaissance square. Ronay feels that a little food may help settle his friend. But throughout the afternoon, the hiccup attacks continue and seem to be getting worse. A life of excessive drinking has finally caught up with Morrison. The cracks have been showing for years, even in his earliest days with the Doors.
Alcohol was his drug of choice. I mean, he did other drugs here and there, but mostly it was alcohol. One of the reasons that he would drink so much is because he liked the experience of not being in control and not worrying about it.
From the beginning, Morrison was unpredictable in the studio. Often wasted and indifferent, he brought sessions to a halt. The band was not amused. As the band's popularity soared, Morrison spent more and more time in bars. One of his drinking buddies was his bodyguard, Tony Funches.
Barney's Beanery. Ha! That was the prototypical lunatic English roadie, two-fisted drinking bar, clown's den, madhouse that ever existed in L.A. But me and Jimbo managed to get ourselves 86 out of there.
He was so staggeringly drunk, and you just didn't know what he was going to do.
Rock and roll lifestyle. We were stinking drunk all the time.
Every time he came into New York, we used to go to a bar around Columbus Circle. The bar was about 2 or 3 city blocks long with a mirror behind the entire bar. And Jim said to me, you know, I could take this bottle and throw it through that mirror and smash it, and I won't feel any remorse at all. Could you do that? And I said, no, I would feel remorse. Which led me to believe that somewhere in the background, there was a sociopath.
There was one night at the Whiskey, and he reached over and just whacked me across the face, just slapped me across the face for no reason at all. No reason.
What happened is he would get stone drunk at the moment's notice. He had no warning, nothing leading up to that to let him know when it was coming on. He'd be fine, he'd be sober, he'd be articulate, and then he'd be wild and nuts. And part of that is an allergic reaction to alcohol, which is a documented thing that people have now, but they didn't know what it was then.
If Jim were alive today and were performing the same way, everyone would say, Jim, you got to get into a program. You got to stop drinking. You got to take care of yourself. You got to go to a 12-step program. You got to go to a rehab. You're going to die if you continue this. Then it was, oh, you know, Jim, he drinks too much.
Morrison's heavy drinking was making him moody and violent. It was also directly affecting the Doors' live shows.
During 1969, the performances degraded steadily. The alcohol became more prevalent. The singing became less dynamic. The shows lost their vigor, lost a lot of their sparkle.
As a band, the Doors had a problem. Not only was their singer stealing all the headlines, he was now sabotaging their live shows.
It's too damn bad that he couldn't keep his act together, because when he was good, he was excellent. And when he was bad, he was terrible.
Hey, what are all these people doing? Oh, I hate people.
And now in Paris, lunching with his friend Alain René, the years of hard drinking have taken their toll on Morrison's health. And in 13 hours, he will draw his final breath. After lunch, Morrison and Alain René browse through a film shop. Since film school, Morrison has had a passion for the cinema, having recently made a movie called Highway. The film, a dark, impressionistic journey through the desert, was inspired by a troubling childhood experience that followed Morrison all through his life.
A key event in Jim's childhood, and in fact the thing he referred to as the event that shaped him, occurred when he was 4 years old. The family was driving between Albuquerque and Santa Fe, and they came upon this horrific accident. A truckload of Indian workers had overturned, and Indians were dead all over the highway.
Morrison believed that the spirit of one of those Indians, a shaman, entered his own soul and stayed there.
He claimed it affected his writing. He claimed it affected the way he did the concerts, that there was always this soul, this Indian shaman, pushing him to these experiences.
Those experiences were later expressed by Morrison in the form of dark, mystical poems. Poems that the Doors used to set them apart from other bands. But for Morrison, rock and roll was only a short-term vehicle for his poetic vision.
He looked at his rock and roll world as a temporary stop because he was a poet and he saw himself that way. And he dragged his poetry books everywhere he went, and he thought this was just a temporary ride.
And in 1969, to prove it, he self-published a limited edition book of his poetry and sent copies out to friends. But the response was less than overwhelming.
You know, there's initial reaction, a negative reaction by the established literary community that, you know, is like, oh, rock star, you know, so that created some tensions.
It's tough for a pop star or a rock artist to be taken seriously as a poet, especially when they themselves use that terminology. Jim Morrison, I think, welcomed it more than the others and therefore got vilified for it.
Desperate to be seen as a serious poet, Morrison decided to dismantle his rock star image. He asked that his bare-chested young lion photos not be used for promotion purposes. He grew a bushy beard to hide his pretty face and gained an alarming amount of weight.
Guy could grow a Rasputin Russian winter beard overnight as a hairy.
He definitely put on weight. Part of that was drinking all the time. But also he was becoming uncomfortable with having to live up to that, you know, sexy young rock and roll image.
And in the summer of 1971, Paris is where Morrison has come to escape that rock star image and to refocus on writing more poetry. He has lost the beard and some of the weight, but years of alcohol abuse have finally caught up with him. His afternoon walk with his friend, Alain René, brings him back to his rented apartment on Rue Beautreillis. Even though it's July, he brings up firewood. Climbing the stairs, he suddenly collapses, out of breath. Jim Morrison is only 27, but he suffers the aches and pains of a man several times his age. And soon, the pain will end. He has less than 12 hours to live.